Chapter 4. At school on Monday, Iris's mom dropped her off personally while she went to speak with the principal about the ceremony. "I'll talk to you about it when you get out of school," Iris's mom said from the driver's seat. Iris just nodded and opened the door. "Iris." Iris turned around, her mom's no-nonsense face breaking into a small smile. "Try not to think about it right now, okay? Recognition isn't everything, but I'm still going to discuss this with him." Iris nodded and forced a smile back as her mom pulled off in the direction of the principal's office. She walked toward the building, the brisk air cutting across her face. The snow was turning to slush on the ground, already muddied from the footprints of the other kids who had entered the school before her. She saw the footprints and thought again of the graveyard, how she felt like the hand and footprints were following her. Maybe one of the spirits of the snow was following her. The wind whistled a bit, causing Iris to shiver. Before she opened the door to the main entrance of Nelson's Pond Middle, the small middle school she and Daniel attended. The air was always slightly cooler here because of the breeze that came off the pond behind the school. But Iris couldn't help thinking of the spirits. When you hear the winter wind, that's the sound of their screaming. She had to get a grip. She shook her thought out of her head and rushed to her locker to grab her books. Iris walked into social studies, one of the only classes she had with Daniel, and took her seat between Daniel and her friend from the step team, Kayla. The class around her was chattering animatedly about something. "What's going on?" Iris muttered to Daniel, putting a notebook on her desk. "Nothing," Daniel said. He fiddled with his glasses. "It's not important." "So, were you nervous?" a classmate behind Iris asked Heather. "You're practically a celebrity now." Heather Benson turned around in her desk and smiled, her long blonde hair hitting Daniel in his face. "Not at all. As editor of the school newspaper, I'm used to interviewing and being interviewed. The one difference is, this was actually televised." Iris rolled her eyes. Of course, everyone was talking about the young captain's future on the news this weekend. Kayla looked at Iris. "Why weren't you there?" The jumpy feeling Iris felt about the footprints outside coupled uncomfortably with a sad pang in the middle of her stomach. Step team was so important to her and to her teammates. This weekend it felt like it didn't even exist to some people. "Yeah, Iris, we missed you," Heather said, flashing a smile. Iris ignored her. "I wasn't invited. I guess the school forgot to invite me to something else," Iris said, an edge in her voice. She was already tired of talking about this. "My mom is talking to the principal now to figure out what happened." "Oh, I'm sure it was an accident," Heather said. "Did your mom check her email spam folder?" Iris's emotions were boiling over. "Yeah, like it was an accident that I didn't hear about the Beta Club photo, Miss Editor of the newspaper," she said, her voice rising. "Iris," Daniel whispered. He jerked his head to the front door, where the teacher was walking in. The class grew quiet around her. Heather's cheeks turned pink. "What, you think I left you out of that photo on purpose? Oh, come on. It was an accident." She rolled her eyes. Maybe the Young Captains Society forgot to invite the captain of the step team, or maybe they felt like it was too close to what the dance team does, and dance was already represented. "Just because you can dance doesn't mean you can step," Iris sneered. "So you can just—" "Iris, settle down, please," Mr. Hammond said. Iris looked up at the teacher. "But it wasn't—" "Iris, just drop it and settle down." Iris sighed and opened her notebook. Wasn't Heather going to get called out too? It seemed like Iris kept getting remembered for the bad stuff, but never for the good stuff. Class dragged on in another history lesson she'd heard about a million times until Mr. Hammond handed out a stack of papers to each student. "A project," Mr. Hammond said, "about getting to know the community you live in. Outside of these walls, Esau is rich with history, with the town dating back to 1869. You never know what you'll find right in your own backyard. I have some ideas that you can choose from, or you can come up with your own. This will be done in groups of 2. Pick your partner and get together. Be ready to tell me your choice of topic by the end of class. Iris and Daniel looked at each other and grinned. A group project with just the two of them would be fun. Daniel scooted his desk to Iris's, and together they looked at the options they could work on for the project. They were all boring. Iris read off the list. The parks of Esau, the agricultural impact of Esau, the Confederate soldiers of Esau. "We're doing the Confederate soldiers of Esau," Heather announced loudly to her partner in the class. "My daddy has my great-great-grandfather's Confederate sword. I already know some of the history." "What about the parades and festivals of Esau?" Daniel asked. "That could be fun. I mean, we could talk about the cornbread festival since we go every year." Iris scanned the list, again and again. This was all the same stuff she'd learned about ever since second grade. She zoned out, looking around the class at everyone talking excitedly about their projects. Someone was talking about the factories in Esau while Kayla and her partner were discussing local sports teams. She looked out the window. A cloud covered the sun, casting a shadow over the skinny branches outside. It took her back to Friday night, the way the branches looked like they were waiting for her, the branches stretching out, trying to stop her from leaving. She felt that feeling again, that pull. She looked out the window to see the edge of Nelson's Pond, the light bouncing off the water in the way she loved. Wait, that's it. "You never know what you'll find right in your own backyard," Mr. Hammond had said. "We could research abandoned graves." It wasn't a bad idea. She could stop thinking about the nightmares she had about the girl in her window, prove to herself there were no spirits of the snow after her. Then she could go back to not being afraid of anything. "Mr. Hammond," Iris said, raising her hand, "so we don't have to pick a topic off this list?" Mr. Hammond rubbed his beard. "No, as long as it has historical context in Esau, you can pick whatever you want." "Daniel," Iris said, her voice almost a whisper, "listen, let's do abandoned graves of Esau." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "Why?" "Because that way we can find out more about that grave we saw and why that girl was buried out there in the woods, of all places." The thought was knitting together in Iris's head faster than Sugar's fingers when she made those scarves for her and Daniel. "Iris," Daniel sighed, "are you still thinking about that?" 5 more minutes, class," Mr. Hammond said. "Be ready to turn in your topic." Iris looked at Daniel. Daniel looked down at the suggested topics and shrugged. It is pretty sad that her grave is just back there, forgotten. We could bring some recognition to it. Okay, it beats writing another essay about the cornbread festival." He wrote "Abandoned Graves in Esau" on his paper and circled it. Iris grinned. Iris and Daniel's project was going to be so different that it was bound to get noticed. She looked toward the window again, at the trees swaying in the winter wind. The branches looked like old, dead fingers waving at her.